Okay, let's see if okay, so it shows it's working. And we're going to start back on chapter 8 now. I'm so sorry about all the things that happened. It should not be live. It should just be recording only. That's what I think. I don't know. So, let me make sure that. Okay. Anyway, back to chapter 8 where we started. Okay, here we go. Shows recording only. All right. Now I got to go find first page of chapter 8 again. All right, chapter 8. Back to where we were. Okay. Because it was all messed up. Okay. I wanted to talk to someone, and I think it's because my father is in prison. Hannah, the pretty thin-lipped 22-year-old who was my new patient, directed this fairly audible remark to her right toward one of my bookshelves. After a moment, she looked at me directly, shyly repeated herself. I need someone to talk to. My father's in prison. She made a gasp, it was an effort so much to speech that she was just so exhausted in her lungs. And then she was silent. Especially when people were very frightened, a certain amount of doing therapy is simply knowing how to paraphrase the comments of the person seated before you without sounding judgmental or patronizing. I bent forward slightly, my fingers laced around my knee, and tried to recapture Hannah's gaze, which had now dropped to the rust-colored oriental rug between our chairs. I said quietly, your father's in prison. Yes, she looked up slowly. Prison? As if I had gleaned this information telepathically. He killed a man. I mean, he didn't mean to, but he killed a man. And now he's in prison? Yes, he is. She blushed and her eyes filled. She started to cry. I'm always impressed by the fact that even the tiniest amount of being listened to, the bare suggestion of the possibility of a kind treatment can bring such an immediate rush of emotion. I think this is because we are almost never really listened to. In my work as a psychologist, I'm reminded every day of how infrequently we are heard. Any of us, our actions even marginally understood. And one of the ironies of my listening profession is that the lesson that's in many ways each of us ultimately remain a mystery to everyone else. How long has your father been in prison? I asked. About 41 days. That was really a long trial. They didn't keep him in prison during the trial. And you felt that you needed to talk to someone? Yes, I can't. It's just so, she's depressed. I think I'm getting depressed. I have to start med school. Med school? You mean in September? It was July. Yes, I wish I didn't have to. The tears came soundless. No weeping noises, as if the rest of her were unaware she was crying. Streams fell from her eyes and rolled down onto her white silk shirt, making translucent stains. Apparent from this, her demeanor remained unchanged, stoic. Her face did not fall. I'm always moved by stoicism. Hannah's was extreme. I was hooked. Using both forefingers, she shoved her straight black hair into submission behind her ears. Her hair was so shiny, it looked as if someone had polished it. She gazed past me at the window and asked, do you know what it's like for your father to be in prison? No, I don't, I said. Maybe you should tell me. And so Hannah told me her story, or this part of it. Her father had been the principal of the public high school in the middle-class suburb where Hannah was raised, in a different state, 1,000 miles away from west of Boston. According to Hannah, he was an extremely likable man who naturally drew people to him. He was a star, as Hannah put it, and was much loved by the students, the teachers, and nearly everyone else in the small community that surrounded the high school. He was always at the cheerleading practices and the football games, and whether or not the home team won was personally important to him. Born and raised in rural Midwest, he had strong conservative values, Hannah said. He believed in patriotism and mightily defended this country, and also education and self-betterment. Hannah was his only child, and for as long as she could remember, he had told her that even though she was not a boy, she could be whatever she wanted to be. Girls could be whatever they wanted to be. Girls could be doctors. Hannah could be a doctor. And right there, he was being exactly what we're talking about, a sociopath. I mean, he's talking down to her, like just because she's a girl, she's not equal. That's horrible as a father. You should never do that. Hannah loved her father clearly. He's the sweetest, most moral man in the world. He really is, she told me. You should have seen all the people who came to the trial. They just sat there and cried for him. Cried and cried. They felt so sorry for him, but there was nothing they could do. You know, Nothing they could do. The killing took place on a March night when Hannah was in college as a sophomore at that time. She just happened to be home on spring break. In the wee hours, she had been wakened by a very loud noise outside her parents' house. I didn't know it was a gun until later, she told me. She got up sleepily to look around and found her mother standing just inside the open front door of the house, weeping and wringing her hands. The March air was rushing in. It was the weirdest thing. I could still close my eyes and see her standing there like that. The wind was blowing her bathrobe around, and it was like I knew everything. Everything that happened right at that moment, before I even knew anything. I knew what had happened. I knew my father would be arrested. I saw it all. Well, that's like a picture from a nightmare, right? The whole thing was like a nightmare. You can't believe it's happening in real life, and you're thinking you'll wake up. Sometimes I still think I'm just going to wake up and everything was just some kind of horrible dream. But how do I know everything before I was even knew anything? I saw my mom standing there like it was happening in the past, like deja vu or something. It was weird. Or maybe not. Maybe it just seems that way now. When I remember, I don't know. As soon as she saw Hannah, her mother grabbed her as if pulling her daughter out of the way of an oncoming train and screamed at her, "Don't go out there! Don't go out there!" Hannah made a move toward the outside, nor did she press her mother for an explanation. She just stood there in a terrified mother's embrace. "I'd never seen her like that before," Hannah said. Still, like I keep wanting to say, it was almost as if they had been through it already. I knew better. I'd stay inside. At some point, Hannah is not sure how long this took. Her father came in by the wide open front door to the place where she and her mother stood clutching each other. He didn't have the gun in his hand. He had dropped it outside there somewhere in the front yard. Wearing only pajama pants, he stood before his little family. He looked fine. He was sort of panting, but he didn't look frightened or anything. And for just a second, just about a half second, I thought maybe everything was going to be okay. As she told me this, Hannah's tears came again. But I was too scared to ask what happened. After a while, Mom let go of me. She called the police. I remember she asked him, "Is he hurt?" And he said, "I think so. I think I hurt him really bad." And then she went into the kitchen and she called the police. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Right. I said it had been just a rhetorical question. In bits and pieces, Hannah had learned what had happened. Earlier during that awful night, Hannah's mother, always a light sleeper, had heard noises coming from the living room. Sounds like breaking glass, and had roused her sleeping husband. There were more noises. The man in the house became convinced there was an intruder to be dealt with, and he got out of the bed to prepare. Carefully, according to his wife later, by only the dim illumination of a tiny book light, he took out the gun box that he kept in the bedroom closet. He unlocked it, and he loaded the gun. His wife pleaded with him simply to call the police. He had never even replied to such entreaty. He hissed at her commandingly, "Stay there." And still in near darkness, he left for the living room. Seeing him, or more likely hearing him, the prowler fled the house by the front door. Hannah's father gave chase. He shot at the man. By sheer blind luck, as one of his attorneys would put it, he hit him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. As it happened, the intruder fell on the sidewalk between the lawn and the curb. This meant technically that Hannah's father had just shot an unarmed man on the street. Strangely, incredibly, no neighbors came out of their houses. Everything was so quiet, so very quiet, Hannah said to me there in her office. The police arrived quickly after Hannah's mother called them, followed by a few more people and a silent ambulance. Eventually, her father and her mother were taken away to the police station. My mother called her sister and my uncle to come stay with me for the rest of the night, just like I was suddenly a little girl all over again. They weren't any help. They were pretty hysterical. I think I just felt really numb. The next day and the following weeks, the situation occupied the local media's interest. The shooting had taken place at a quiet middle-class suburb. The shooter was an ordinarily middle-class man with no known history of violence. He had not been drunk, nor had he been using drugs. The dead man was a known felon, a drug addict, and just before he was shot, he had broken into the house through the window. No one except the prosecuting attorney disputed that he was a robber or that Hannah's father had pursued and shot him because he had been an intruder in the house. This was a victims' rights case. This was a gun control case. This was a get tough on crime case. It clearly illustrated the dangers of being a vigilante. Or maybe it demonstrated conclusively that homeowners ought to have increased rights. The ACLU got mad, and the NRA even got more so. You know, the NRA, they have to be in on everything. I think you should have it. You should be able to defend your own home. I agree with that. There was a long trial, as Hannah had said, and then an appeal and another long trial. In the end, Hannah's father was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to a maximum of 10 years in prison. The attorney said it was more likely to be only 2 or 3. The news of a high school principal sentenced to 10 years in prison for shooting a burglar on his front lawn aroused strong emotions. There were protests on all sides. The decision was unconstitutional. It defied common sense and natural law. The convicted man was a dangerous self-appointee and the rights of a violator. He was an American hero and his family protector. He was a violent madman. He was a martyr to the cause, to any number of causes. Through all of this, impossibly, Hannah was going to college, making A's and applying to medical schools, activities dogmatically insisted upon by her embattled father. He just wouldn't allow my life to be ruined by all this stupidity. That's what he said. And Hannah got into nearly every medical school she applied to, despite her father's predicament. She told me that, if anything, the whole thing probably helped me get into. It was his cause. Finished with her narrative, Hannah searched through a small leather handbag, found a tissue, and began to blot her cheeks and dab her streaks on her shirt. Even though there was a full box of tissues in plain sight on a little table just to the left of her elbow. So you see, I don't really need therapy exactly, but I really would like to talk to someone. I really don't want to be in this depressed when I start medical school. I don't know. Do you think it would be all right for me to see you? Hannah had affected me with her story and her demeanor. I felt tremendous sympathy for her, and I told her so. To myself, I wondered how much help she would actually be able to accept from me, the psychological trauma therapist she had called because she had seen my name in a newspaper article. Out loud, we agreed to meet once a week for a while, so Hannah could have someone to talk to. The medical school she had finally chosen was in Boston, and at her mother's urging, she had moved east right after college. So she could be settled in before classes started and away from the craziness back home. Her mother felt the situation with her husband was negative for her daughter. I thought I had seldom heard such an understatement, and I assured Hannah that yes, it would be all right for her to see me. After she left, I paced around my office for a minute or two, staring at the tall windows onto Boston's Back Bay, walking over and rifling through the papers on the wide cluttered desk, and then returning to the windows, as I often do after sessions in which someone has told me a great deal, but not nearly everything. As I paced, I was interested not so much in the legal and political questions of what, when, and where, but the psychological preamble questions of why. Hannah had not asked why, as in, why did my father shoot that gun? Why didn't he just let the man go? And I reflected that emotionally, she could not afford to ask the question why, and the answer might be too unsettling. The entire relationship with her father was at stake, and maybe this was the reason she needed me, to help her navigate through the conceivable answers to this perilous question. Perhaps her father had been caught up in a frenzy at the moment and had shot the gun almost accidentally, hitting the intruder lethally in the head. By sheer blind luck, and as the attorney had said, or perhaps her father had genuinely believed his family was in danger, and his proactive instincts had taken him over. Or perhaps Hannah's father, the family man, this ordinary middle-class high school principal, was a killer. In subsequent sessions during the summer and in the fall, as Hannah began medical school, she told me more about her father. In the kind of work I do, I often hear about behaviors and events that the patient herself, over her lifetime, has grown used to and thinks of as normal. But this to me sounded distinctively abnormal and sometimes alarming. This kind of report is what I soon began to come from Hannah, as she described her father she obviously believed she was recounting unremarkable stories. I pieced together the picture of an emotionally cold individual who's mean and controlling, and his actions made me cringe. Also, I became familiar with the understandable haze of my intelligent young patient she was lost in, which when it came to seeing her father for what he was. I discovered that Hannah's father dealt with his pretty wife and his high achieving daughter more like trophies than human beings, usually ignoring them completely when they were sick or having a difficult time for some other reason. But lovingly, Hannah reinterrupted that her father's callous treatment of her. She just thought it was normal. He's really proud of me, she said, or so I've always thought, and so he can't stand to see it when I make a mistake. Once when I was in fourth grade, my teacher sent home a note home that said I wasn't doing my homework. Dad didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after that. I know it was 2 weeks because I had a little calendar. I still have it somewhere, and I marked off the days one by one. It was as if suddenly I didn't even exist. It was awful. Oh, and another good example, more recent, I was in high school already. His high school, the one he's the principal of. And I got a really huge, ugly blemish on my cheek. So she pointed to an empty space on her lovely complexion. He didn't say a word to me. He wouldn't even look at me for 3 days. He's such a perfectionist. I guess he wants to show me off. And when something's wrong, he really can't do that. It makes me feel bad about myself sometimes. But I suppose I can understand it, more or less. Hannah described a time in her childhood when her mother had been critically ill and in the hospital for nearly 3 weeks. Hannah believed her mother had contracted pneumonia, but she said, I was really too young to remember much about it. Hannah's aunt had taken her to see her mother during this time, but her father, he had not visited his wife once while she was hospitalized. And when she returned home, he was angry and agitated, concerned that his pale and weakened wife might not get her beauty back, as Hannah phrased it. That's horrible. Absolutely horrible. But you know what? That's exactly what a sociopath does. You're just a trophy. I get it. As for Hannah's pretty mother, there really isn't much to tell. Hannah told me she's sweet and gentle. She's always taking good care of me, especially when I was little. She likes to garden and she does a lot of charities and such. She's just really a nice lady. And oh, she was homecoming queen when she was at high school. Dad likes to tell that story to people. When I pressed Hannah about her mother's reaction to her father's neglect behavior, she said, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, there were things that would have made me really angry if I'd been my mom, but she never said anything. Just kind of goes her own way. Like I said, she's a sweet, gentle lady. That's probably what you'd hear if you ask someone who knows her. And I guess what's going along with that, I mean, she never really stands up for herself. Not very much anyway. She certainly never confronts Dad. I mean, I think I'd faint dead away if she ever did that. She's the perfect lady. Her only little flaw, if you could even call it that, is her vanity. She's really beautiful, and I think she knows it. And she spends a lot of time working on her hair and her body and such. I think she sees that as her only power in the world, if that makes any sense. Hannah looked at me questioningly, and I nodded that I understood what she meant. And to give him his due, Dad's really good to her about that. He sends her flowers when he's gone, and he always tells her how beautiful she is. I think that kind of thing must really mean a lot to her. He sends her flowers when he's gone, I ask. Where does he go? Well, when I asked that question, where does he go? Hannah's composure lost a little ground. She shifted in her chair and said, for the moment, she replied, I really don't know. I come in really late at night, or he'd even be gone for a whole weekend. Mom would just get flowers. And I mean, really, it was between the two of them. It was just too weird. So I tried to ignore it. Yes, well, that's the way I felt. I don't know how Mom feels about it. Any guesses about where he went? I pressed her, probably a little too hard, but it seemed an important point. No, I always tried to ignore it, she repeated. Then she began to study my bookshelves again. The next week, I asked Hannah the conspicuous questions of whether her father had ever been physically violent with her or her mother. Had he ever hit them? She brightened and answered eagerly, oh no, he never does anything like that. I can't even imagine that. In fact, if anyone else ever hurt me or Mom, I think he'd kill them. And there's the word kill again. There it is. I waited an instant for an impact of her words to strike her, but she appeared unaffected. She shifted her position again and reinforced her answer, saying, no, he would never hit us. Nothing like that ever went on at all. She was unaccountably pleased to answer. She was unaccountably pleased to answer me in that way, and somehow I was inclined to believe her that her father had never been physically violent in the context of his family. But after 25 years of treating trauma survivors, I have learned that getting his that getting hit is actually one of the more bearable ways a person can be assaulted. I tried a different tack. I said, I know you love your father and you need to hold on tight to that love right now. But all relationships have difficulties. There's nothing about him that you'd change if you could. He's posing that as a question. Yes, that's absolutely right. I do need to hold on to him. And he really deserves to have huge sympathy from everyone, especially now. She paused and she craned her neck to look back behind her at the double doors to my office. I think she's ready to run at that point. Think about it. He's really digging in now. Then she turned back and looked at me for a long moment as if appraising my motives and finally said, but since you want to know what I'd change, there's a little something actually. She made a little humorless laugh and blushed scarlet to the roots of her shimmering black hair. Well, what's that? I asked, matter of factly as I could. It's a silly thing, really. Well, sometimes he flirts with my friends, sort of, and he really bothers me. Actually, now that I say it out loud, it sounds even more ridiculous. I guess it shouldn't bother me so much for that, but it really does. He flirts with your friends? How do you mean? Well, since junior high school, more or less, some of my friends are really gorgeous. And there's this one particular named Georgia. Well, anyway, he flirts with them. He winks at them and he kind of grabs them and tickles them. And sometimes he makes what I think are really suggestive remarks. Like he'll say, going braless today, Georgia, or something. But I guess I'm misrepresenting. Oh man. Now that I'm talking about it, this is out loud. I feel dumb. I don't even. It probably shouldn't bother me at all. I said, if I were in your place, I think it would bother me a lot. You do? She looked encouraged for a moment, and then she said, at the high school Dad runs, the high school I went to, parents have actually claimed that he was inappropriate with other kids. There were 3 times, I think, or at least they're the ones that I heard about. I remember one time the parents were really streamed. They actually took their kid out of the high school. Everybody came to his rescue after that. They thought it was really sad that these days, these such good, kind men could be accused of some perverse thing just because he gave one of the students a hug or whatever. And what do you think? I don't know. I'd probably burn in hell or something for admitting this, but the truth is, I don't know. I guess because I've seen him do so much stuff that people could misread really easily. I mean, if you're the principal and you walk up behind some hot-looking 16-year-old in the hall and you grab her by the waist, you've got to expect her parents to get a little ticked if they hear about it. I don't know why he doesn't understand that. This time, Hannah did not ask me to confirm her opinion. She stared at the bookshelf some more and was silent. Finally, in a little flood of rushed words, she said, and you know what else? I have never told anyone, and I hope you're not going to think less of me because I'm telling you. But one time, this girl I know, I don't know her very well, but she went to the high school. She came up and sat beside me in the library and started writing notes. She was smiling and she wrote, do you know what your father told me about Central High? As she passed it to me, I wrote, I give up. What? And she wrote, he told me Central was like a sexual cafeteria. She put sexual cafeteria in big quotes. I was so furious. I almost couldn't keep from crying, but I got out of there and then I didn't know what to do with the piece of paper. So I crumpled it up and put it in my pocket. And when I got home, I got the matches and burned it into the sink. The rush of the words over, she looked down at the rust-colored carpet. I'm so sorry, Hannah. You truly didn't deserve to have that happen to you. You must have been so embarrassed and so heartbroken. But why did you why do you think I'd think less of you for telling me? In a voice much younger than her 22 years, she answered, I should have kept it a secret. It's disloyal. Hannah and I continued our sessions together. And as the beginning of many of her appointments, she would tell me about strange phone messages her mother was receiving back home. After that night, the burglary, we pretty much stopped being able to answer the phone. There were so many so-called reporters and so many cranks. At this point, Mom always just let the machine answer it. And if somebody she wants to talk to, she can just pick it up. It's okay, I guess. She just erases the cranks. But lately, she's been getting these weird druggy messages. They really upset her. They're freaky. Even freakier than the usual freaks. Has she told you what they say? I asked. Sort of. She gets so upset. It's a little hard to make sense of what she's saying to me on the phone. But I think the basic idea is they're accusing Dad of dealing drugs or something. Ridiculous stuff. But it really gets to Mom. She said that they were demanding to get some kind of information from the house and they were going to hurt him. I guess they kept saying something about information and things about hurting him. But there's nothing in the house. I mean, Dad's not there. He's in prison. Has your mother notified the police about the messages? No, she's afraid that she'll get Dad in trouble. For a moment, I could not think of an appropriate reply to that last remark. And when I was silent, Hannah filled in. She said, I know it's illogical, but by the end of Hannah's first year in medical school, her mother had received a dozen or so of these incomprehensible and frightening messages, and still neither mother nor daughter had reported them to the police. In May, Hannah decided she wanted to fly out and visit her imprisoned father. We talked about how emotionally painful such a visit would be for her, but she was determined to go. We had several conversations about her upcoming trip, trying to prepare her for the various situations she might need to handle and for the feelings she might have when she saw her father in prison. But nothing could have prepared either Hannah or me for what did happen. In retrospect, I believe he must have reached the point of wanting an audience for his gamemanship, a frame of mind similar to Skip's when he enticed his little sister to the lakeside. I cannot think of any other likely reason that Hannah's father would suddenly have been so forthcoming with his daughter. As for Hannah, she had not told me she intended to be blunt with her father. Perhaps she did not even know this herself beforehand. To my mind, her behavior when she... Hang on, my little microphone fell over. Let me fix this. Hang on. All right. Here we go. Let's get back on this. How much? Okay, perhaps she did not even know this herself beforehand. To my mind, her behavior when she visited her at the prison is one of the best illustrations I've ever encountered of how much a person can know about another person without consciously knowing that she knows it. When she got back to Boston, this is what she told me about their conversations. I imagined that more than she said, but the following is all that Hannah shared with me. She began somewhat tearfully, describing the harrowing and undignified process of getting into the prison to visit an inmate. Then her tears cleared completely, and she told me that she rests calmly with a certain intellect detachment. She said, I was terrified he looked pathetic and beaten, but he didn't look that way at all. He looked fine. He looked, I don't know, alive is what I want to say. His eyes were sparkling. I've seen him like that before, but I really didn't expect to see him that way in prison. He seemed glad to see me. He asked me about my grades. I thought he'd ask me about Mom, but he didn't. And so I thought, well, why put it off? So I asked him. She made this statement, and as if I knew she meant, and I did not. I said, you asked him what? I asked him, what was the man looking for in the house, Dad? He said, what man? But I'm sure he knew what I was talking about. He didn't look as shamed or embarrassed or any of that, I said. The man you shot. He didn't even blink. He just said, oh, that man, he was looking for some names, but didn't find them. I can assure you of that. Hannah had been speaking without looking at me. Now she made eye contact and said, Dr. Stout, his expressions, he looked like we were talking about something that was really fun to talk about. I wanted to run out of there, but I didn't. I did not know you were going to do this. You're amazing. It was awful. She continued without seeming to hear that I was marveling at her actions. I said, so you knew him? And he said, of course I knew him. Why would I kill a perfect stranger? And then he laughed and laughed. Dr. Stout, still speaking directly to me through his considerable emotional distance from the subject matter, she went on. And then I asked him, are you involved with heroin? He didn't really answer that one. He just told me that I was smart. Can you believe that? He told me that I was smart. She shook her head in disbelief and was silent for a while. Finally, I prompted her. I said, did you ask other questions, Hannah? Yes, I did ask him. I said, have you ever killed anyone else? And do you know what he said? Then she was silent again. And for a moment I replied, no, I don't know what he said. He said, I plead the fifth. Only then did Hannah cry again, this time without restraint. Her sudden wrenching grief for her father she had thought was so there reminded me of a quotation from Emerson, who said that of all of the ways to lose a person, death is the kindest. She wept for a long time, but I was relieved to find that when her tears were finally spent, she was able to turn her thoughts to her own safety. Wiping her face with a handful of tissues from the box, she looked at me and said in a steady voice, the lawyers are going to get him out. You know, what am I going to do? And I heard myself answering with decidedly more directed maternal velocity than ever. I accustomed to using in therapy sessions. You're going to protect yourself, Hannah. What can the concise bound do about the guiltless? This is another part of being a sociopath right here. This was talked about in another chapter. If you've been listening and you've been on here, you know, if you've been paying attention to this book and you've been on our lives before, sociopaths are not few and far between. On the contrary, they make up a significant portion of our population. Though Hannah's experience was especially up close and personal, for any individual living in the Western world to get all the way through life without knowing at least one such person in some capacity or another is virtually impossible. People without a conscience experience emotions very differently from you and me, and they do not experience love at all or any other kind of positive attachment to their fellow human beings. This deficit, which is hard even to ponder, reduces life to an endless game of attempted domination over other people. Sometimes sociopaths are physically violent, as Hannah's father was. Often they are not, preferring to win over others by raiding the business world or in the professionals of government, or simply by exploiting one person. Hang on a minute, let's get my pages away. By exploiting someone at some time or in torturous relationships, or Sydney's, okay, now this is a strange way to put this. Sydney's non-husband Luke did. At present, sociopathy is incurable. Furthermore, sociopaths almost never wish to be cured. In fact, it's likely that building on the neurobiological configuration of a sociopath, certain cultures, notably our Western one, actively encourage antisocial behaviors, including violence, murder, and warmongering. The facts are difficult for most people to accept. They are offensive, non-utilitarian, and frightening. But understanding and accepting them as a real aspect of our world is rule number one of the 13 rules of dealing with sociopaths in everyday life that I tell to patients like Hannah and to other people who are interested in protecting themselves and the people they love. Here are the 13 rules. The 13 rules for dealing with a sociopath in everyday life. Number one, the first rule involves the bitter pill of accepting that some people literally have no conscience. These people do not often look like Charles Manson or Ferengi bartender. They look like us. And number two, in context between your instincts and what is implied by the role a person has taken on education, doctors, leaders, criminals, animal lovers, humanities, and parents go with your instincts. Whether you want to be or not, you are constantly observing a human behavior, and your unfiltered impressions through alarming and seemingly outlandish may well help you out if you will let them. Your best self understands without being told that impressive and moral sounding labels do not bestow conscience on anyone who do not have it to begin with. Number three, when considering a new relationship of any kind, practice the rule of threes regarding the claims and promises of a person makes and the responsibilities he or she has. Make the rule of three your personal policy. One lie, one broken promise, or a single neglect responsibility may be a misunderstanding instead. Two may involve a serious mistake, but three lies says you're dealing with a liar and a deceit and the linchpin of a conscienceless behavior. Cut your losses and get out as soon as you can. Leaving, though it may be hard, will be easier now than later and less costly. Do not give your money, your work, your secrets, or your affection to the three-timer. Your valuable gifts will be wasted. Number four, the question authority. Once again, trust your own instincts and anxieties, especially those concerning people who claim the dominating others, violence, war, and some other violation of your conscience is the grand solution to some problem. Do this even when, especially when, everyone around you has completely stopped questioning authority. Recite to yourself what Stanley Milgram taught us about obedience. At least 6 out of 10 people will blindly obey to the bitter end an official looking authority in their midst. The good news is that having social support makes people somewhat more likely to challenge authority. Encourage those around you to question too. Number 5, suspect flattery. Oh, I'm sure we've all heard this a lot. Compliments, compliments. Compliments are lovely, especially when they are sincere. In contrast, flattery is extreme and appeals to our egos in unrealistic ways. And the material of counterfeit charm and really always involves an intent to manipulate. Manipulation through flattery is sometimes innocuous and sometimes sinister. Peek over your message ego and remember to suspect flattery. This flattery rule applies to an individual basis and also at the level of groups and even whole nations. Throughout all of human history to the present, the call to war has included the flattering claim that one's own forces are about to accomplish a victory that will change the world for the better, a triumph that's morally, laudably justified by its humane outcome, unique in human endeavor, righteous and worthy of enormous gratitude. Since we began to record the human story, all of our major wars have been framed in this way. On all sides of the conflict and in all languages, the adjective most often applied to the word war is holy. And an argument can easily be made that humanity will have peace when nations of people are at least able to see through this masterful flattery. Just as an individual pumped up on the flattery of a manipulator is likely to behave in foolish ways, exaggerated patriotism that is flattery fueled in its a dangerous thing. Number 6, if necessary, redefine your concept of respect. Too often we mistake fear for respect, and the more we are fearful of someone, the more we view him or her as deserving our respect. I have spotted Bengal cats who was named Muscle Man by my daughter when she was a toddler because even a kitten, he looked like a professional wrestler. Grown now, he is much larger than most other domestic cats. His formidable claws resembled those of an Asian leopard. And this book is so hard to read because it's just written so wordy and ridiculous. But anyway, we'll just keep going. Okay. His formidable claws resembled those of Asian leopard cats' ancestors, and by the temperament, he is gentle and peace-loving. My neighbor has a little calico who visits. Evidently, the calico's predatory charisma is huge, and she is brilliant at directing that evil eye at other cats. Whenever she is within 50 feet, Muscle Man, all 15 pounds of him to her, 7, cringes and crouches in fear of that feline deterrence. Muscle Man is a splendid cat. He is warm and loving, and he is close to my heart. Nonetheless, I would like to believe that some of his reactions are more primitive than mine. I hope I do not mistake fear for respect, because to do so would be ensure that my own victimization. Let us use our big human brains to overpower our animal tendency to bow to predators, so we can disentangle the reflexive confusion and anxiety and awe. In a perfect world, human respect would be an automatic reaction only to those who are strong, kind, and morally courageous. The person who profits from frightening you is not likely to be any of those. The resolve to keep respect separate from fear is even more crucial for groups and nations. The politician, small or lofty, who menaces the people with frequent reminders that the possibility of crime, violence, and terrorism, who then uses their magnified fear to gain allegiance, is more likely to be a successful con artist than a legitimate leader. This, too, has been true throughout human history. Do not join the game. This is number 7. Intrigue and sociopath's tool. Resist the temptation to compete with this seductive sociopath to outsmart him. To outsmart him or even haunter with him. In addition to reducing yourself to his level, you would be distracting yourself from what is really important, which is to protect yourself. Number 8, The best way to protect yourself from a sociopath is to avoid him, to refuse any kind of contact or communication. Psychologists do not usually like to recommend avoidance, but in this case, I make a very deliberate exception. The only truly effective method for dealing with a sociopath you have identified is to disallow him or her from your life altogether. Sociopaths live completely outside of the social contract, and therefore to include them in a relationship or other social arrangements is perilous. Begin the exclusion of them in the context of your own relationships and social life. You will not hurt anyone's feelings. Strange as it seems, though, they may try to pretend otherwise. Sociopaths do not have any such feelings to hurt. You may never be able to make your family and friends understand why you're avoiding a particular individual. Sociopathy is surprisingly difficult to see and even harder to explain. Avoid him anyway. It could be a her. I don't like him saying it's a him. It could be a him or a her. There are both. Men and women can be sociopaths. If total avoidance is impossible, make plans to come as close as you can to the goal of total avoidance. Number 9, question your tendency to pity too easily. Pity's another one. Respect should be reserved for the kind and the morally courageous. Pity is another socially valuable response, and it should be reserved for innocent people who are genuine or who are in genuine pain and who have fallen or misfortune. If instead you find yourself often pitying someone who constantly hurts you or other people and who actively campaigns for your sympathy, the chances are close to 100% that you are dealing with a sociopath. Related to this, I recommend that you severely challenge your need to be polite in absolutely all situations. For normal adults in our culture, being what we think of as civilized is like a reflex. Often we find ourselves being automatically curious, even when someone has enraged us, they've enraged us, repeatedly lied to us, and figuratively stabbed us in the back. Sociopaths take huge advantages of these automatic courtesies and exploitive situations. Do not be afraid to be unsmiling and calmly to the point. Number 10, do not try to redeem the unredeemable. Oh, I'm sure we've all been there before, but because we've known people like this and we just tend to, oh, but he's fixable. The famous last words, he's fixable. Or she's fixable. Think of it like that. Number 10, do not try to redeem the unredeemable. Second, third, fourth, and fifth chances are for people who possess conscience. If you are dealing with a person who has no conscience, know how to swallow hard and cut your losses. At some point, most of us need to learn the important, if disappointing, life lesson that no matter how good our intentions are, we cannot control the behavior, let alone the character structures of other people. Learn this fact of human life and avoid the irony of getting caught up in the same ambition he has to control. If you do not desire control, but instead want to help people, then help those who truly want to be helped. I think you'll find this does not include the person who has no conscience. The sociopath's behavior is not your fault, not in any way whatsoever. It is also not your mission. Your mission is your own life. Number 11, never agree out of pity for any other reason to help a sociopath conceal his or her true character. Please don't tell, often spoken tearfully and with great gushing of teeth. It's a trademark plea that thrives, child abusers and sociopaths. Think about this. Oh, what about Stephen Stearns? Think about him. I am sure Jen Soto knew exactly what she had. But okay, I'm going to stop talking about that. Do not listen to those siren songs. Other people deserve to be warned more than sociopaths deserve to have you kept their secrets. If someone without conscience insists that you owe him or her, recall what you are about to read here. You owe me has been the standard line of a sociopath for thousands of years, quite literally, and is still so. It is what Rasputin told the Empress of Russia. It is what Hannah's father implied to her after her eye-opening conversations with him at the prison. We tend to experience you owe me as a compelling claim, but it is simply not true. Do not listen. Also, ignore the one that goes, you are just like me. You are not. Number 12, defend your psyche. Do not allow someone without a conscience or even a string of such people to convince you that humanity is failure. Most humans beings do possess conscience, most human beings are able to love. Number 13, living well is the best revenge. Okay. Now, I think we're going to move on to chapter 12 now. Yes, I'm sorry, chapter 9. Here we go with chapter 9. Let me see how many pages this is. And I'm trying to, I don't know if I can do the whole thing right this minute, but let's see. We might just get through chapters 9 and 8 and 9. So here we go. Chapter 9. Let me turn on the light. Hold on a second. Just take a minute. Hold on. Let's see what they're doing. Okay, I'm back. Chapter 9, the origins of a conscience. Since we have excellent authority that nature is red in tooth and claw, we are all human beings, not killers like Hannah's father. Why do most of us, most of the time, operate accordingly to a seventh sense that directs us to not kill, even when we might profit in some way from doing so, and lesser transgressors too? Why do we usually feel guilty when we steal or lie or hurt other people? We have already discussed what causes sociopathy, and so it is only fair to address the twin questions. What causes conscience? From a certain point of view, the inquiry is not merely parallel, it is actually the better of more baffling questions. Since Darwin published The Origin of Species in 1859, much of the scientific theorizing has considered that all living things, including human beings, have evolved according to the law of nature's selection. According to this law, no more popularity as the law of the jungle, any characteristic that enhances survival and reproduction, and therefore the continuance of its own genetic components, will tend to remain in the population. It is a physical trait or a behavioral tendency bestows this fallacious survival advantage on the individuals for countless generations, in many situations across habitats. In many incrementally and in the course of time, memorial becomes part of the standard genetic blueprint for the species. According to the law of nature selection, tigers have claws, chameleons change colors, and rats avoid open spaces. Possums play dead, and apes have big brains because tigers with claws, camouflage lizards, secretive rodents, and play-acting possums are very smart primates to survive longer and still make more habitats than their peers do. In turn, these babies survive better and reproduce more often than their less fortunate playmates, who are not genetically endowed with natural weapons as such as camouflage techniques or survival promoting anxiety or theatrical ability or superior intelligence. But according to the utterly amoral law of the jungle, of what possible use to the individual members of the predatory species for human beings are technically predators? Are they limitations on the interruptions of powerful moral sense? Imagine, for example, a great white shark with a demanding conscience. How long would she live? What, then, can conceivably be the evolutionary origins of human conscience? Let us put this in extraordinary question another way. Picture people stranded on a small remote island with limited resources. In the long run, what kind of individual is more likely to survive? An honest moral person or someone ruthless like Skip, the kind and empathetic Jackie, Rubenstein, or Doreen Littlefield, Sydney, or the unwittingly self-involved Luke, Hannah or Hannah's father? If there were a few others on this island, the survivors make babies. Given the sociopathy is at least particularly genetically determined. See, they just put it right there. It is genetically determined. So you can be predetermined to be a sociopath. Now, see, a lot of people don't believe that, but it's right here in this book. So it's very possible that that's true, which I find it's strange, but okay, she's saying it right here. So, and this is not the only book I've ever seen this in. I've seen this in other books too. So here we go. Okay. Then would not the population of a sociopath proceed without a second thought to deplete the island's resources completely? Yeah, probably. All about themselves, they're selfish. And all die? And if in the contrary, people with a conscience were still to be found on the island where life was fragile and ruthlessness paid off, What in the natural world could possibly have been fostering their moral sense? Precisely on account of the seemingly impossible challenge to evolutionary theories, naturalists, sociobiologists, comparative psychologists, and philosophers have long been interested in the origins of an unselfishness in humans and other animals. Whenever we carefully observe the actions of the so called higher animals, we see an apparently irreconcilable dictionary between selfish survivalism and intense social interest. And of course, nowhere in this dictionary, in this dichotomy, more extreme than in the human species. We completely ferociously and we teach other children to compete. We compete ferociously and we teach other children to compete. We finance wars and weapons of mass destruction, and we also fund foundations, social welfare programs, and homeless shelters and try to teach our children, those very same children, to be kind. Our species has produced both a Napoleon and a Mother Teresa, but accordingly to fundamentalist evolutionary theory, Mother Teresa should never have been born because neither charity nor a sense of good and evil would even seem to have anything to do with the law of the jungle. So, what is going on here? As David Papanis asked in his New York Times review of Matt Woodley's book, The Origins of Virtue, if nice guys always finish last, when our ancestors were scrabbling around for food on the African savannas, why does morality come to so naturally to us now? And humans are hardly the only animals who can be unselfish. Thompson's gazelles, Stott, leap up and down unconspicuously when they see a predator, decreasing their chances of individual survival. But increasingly, the chances that the herd will get away, chimpanzees share their meat, and sometimes even their most valuable fruit. According to the psychologist Franz de Waals, a raven will communicate the precious discovery of a carcass with loud calls to the flock, making itself a standout to the wolves. When it comes to surviving, clearly there is a certain conflict of interest between the individual and the herd or community flock, and arguments concerning the origin of what evolutionary psychologists call altruistic behaviors have generally centered around the unit of selection evolution. Does the natural selection choose only individuals as far for survival, or can selections perhaps operate at the level of groups that thus favoring the survival of a whole population over others? If survival of the fittest applies only to the individual as the unit of selection, the evolution of unselfishness is almost impossible to explain. For some reasons, that cutthroat Skip, Doreen, Luke, and Hannah's father as individuals would indeed be more likely to outlast the rest of us on that desert island. But if in the unit of selection is the group of the whole, then certain amounts of altruism can be explained. Quite simply, a group composed of individuals who cooperate and take care of one another is much more likely to survive as a group than as a collective of individuals who can only compete with they can only compete or ignore one another. In terms of survival, the successful group will be the one that is operating to some extent as an entity rather than a group in which every single individual is looking out for their number one, to the exclusion of everyone else. Group selection and all implies about our true nature has been an extremely controversial idea among evolutionists, reflecting the fact that the theory of evolution itself is still evolving. Early theories of group selection assumed the possibility that in the beginning there had been cohesive groups and altruistic individuals. They're talking about mammals here. Mammals that emitted warning behaviors, birds that would signal food to the flocks, primates who were generous, and so forth. For groups of selection to favor the first place, this poorly explained presumptive aggressions of altruists from the clear blue sky was irritating to mainly scholars who bestowed on them the damning label of weak science. Damn, I mean, why is this book written this way? Oh. In 1966, George C. Williams of the University of Chicago published a non-classic text entitled adaptation of natural selection. Oh boy. Okay, hang on. In which he argued that although group selections was theoretically possible, it was unlikely to occur in nature. Williams wrote that neither the group nor the individual was the fundamental unit of a natural selection, maintaining that the true unit of selection was the gene itself. For creatures that reproduce sexually, as opposed to organisms that generate clones, the gene is the only unit that self replicates exactly, more or less, through the time. Children are not exact copies of their parents, but genes are fairly precise replicas of themselves. And they're so, Williams insisted that the gene must be the only unit that naturally selections can efficiently use. In other words, survival of the fittest meant survival of the fittest genes, or rather the information coded in them, not necessarily the survival of the fittest individual animals or groups. For Williams, individuals and groups were there only to serve as temporary environments for genetic information. And 10 years later, in 1976, a still popular book called The Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins extended Williams' gene-centered theory and biologist W.D. Hamilton's motion for the kind selection, in which paradoxically re-explains the evolution of unselfish behaviors at the level of the individual by invoking the ideal of selfishness as the level of the gene. This is rather strange notion and deserves some explanation. Kin selection means that the pieces of the individual's genetic blueprint, the only biological aspect of the individual that stands a chance of being immortal, so to speak, will fare better if individual guards not only his own survival and reproduction odds, but also those of other individuals who share the sum of his genetic makeup. If the behaviors generally and protectively toward his blood relatives, their enhanced survival and reproduction rate will increase the numbers of his own genes in future generations, since his relatives and have may I'm saying so his relatives he had what the hell? Okay. Since his relatives and he have many genes in common. What a way to put it. Of course, the expression selfish gene is not intended to imply that DNA is thinking, feeling thing of its own. Dawkins says selfish gene is a metaphor. He means that the characteristics of a species are determined by genes that cause individuals to think, feel, and behave in ways that maximize their existence in those same genetics in the gene pool, regardless of the effects of those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of the individuals themselves. For example, if my brain allows me to form emotional attachments and I feel so warmly toward my cousins that I share my fruit with all of them, my individual life may be shortened. But on average, the odds that my genes will continue in the population have actually been multiplied because my genes are shared in part by each of my cousins. And the genes that I have donated to the gene pool by lengthening the lives of many cousins may well include the genes that cause me to feel emotional attachments. In other words, the genes for emotional attachments are so selfish in the sense that they exist to enhance their own proliferations. And they do this without regard to the well-being or even the continuous existence of individual creatures. And as in the famous quotations by Samuel Butler, a chicken is an egg's way of making another egg. That's funny. Okay, guys, I'm going to stop right there, and we're on page 169. It's kind of getting late. I'm going to start another session later to go ahead and finish chapter 9 and 10. So I'm going to sign off for right now. I'm going to come back later, and we'll get this all downloaded. Thank you very much. Let's enjoy the rest of this book and move on to Manson and Daybell. Bye-bye. Where'd you sit? I'm hot as hell, but I'm just sitting down, sweat. All right, I'm going to sweat. Okay, hang on. Ugh. Standing. You take a break for a minute. Put my medicine. Good God. And we got fresh too. Come on. Come on here, let's sit down. That damn book is so hard to read. Oh God. No, leave me alone. All right, let me take this medicine and drink my Sprite. I'll sit here a minute, take a break. Okay, because my damn, I go pee. This book is so fucking hard. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Woo! Okay. Come on, y'all. Calm down. Guys, calm down. Okay? Calm down. I'm gonna be in payments. Calm down. Use some water. Get some water. Okay? Just drink some water. Don't eat too far off. Some water. Get some water, okay? The breathing too hard. I'm breathing too hard. Some water. Sweat. Oh, it's terrible. Woo! Just give that book. Page number 10. So we'll keep page 10 off the too much. Yeah. Okay, y'all. Come on, you sit down a minute, okay? I'm sitting down studying over here. I took a break. Then we'll just read it. I'm gonna turn on the TV for a minute, drink my Sprite. This damn book. Killing it. Back off. Back off. Take your shoes off. Oh boy. I have to start recording too much. I don't know how to do it. Let's do this. Stop looking at me like that. I don't want to get all that shitness. Quit. Too hot. Come on. Yeah, get over here. He's what else is fun. Come on, listen, I gotta listen. Come here, first. Here you go. Get down. Get down off me.
All three.
Sit down. Now, put this back on here. We don't what's wrong with it. Just a minute. Now, just a minute, okay? Just a minute. Let me get this here. I need to use this. Hang on. Hang on. I gotta put it right here. I need y'all to sit down a minute, okay? Just too much right now. You just sit down and calm down. This is my mouth going. This thing cleared off of here. Here, come here. Here, come here. Right, it's here. Hang on a minute. Let's see what I'm going to do with this. Don't, please don't tell me that was doing that. What I want to do now is recording. Changes. Here we go. Here we go. Let's see what we can do with this thing. Just make part of it. It's using my recording.